Hey Tribe, we are going to be getting into footwork drills that are absolutely essential to improve our boxing. Now, footwork is one of my very, very favorite parts of boxing to work on, and really it's one of those things that helps me position myself in front of the target. Most people, when they first start sparring, first start really getting into boxing, it's not the actual punches they end up struggling with, it's positioning. It's where they are in front of the heavy bag, in front of their opponent. So by working on our footwork, this helps us to alleviate some of that issue and helps our boxing to progress. All right, so let's get into our first footwork drill, and just like with everything else, before we can do anything spectacular or super awesome, we have to really start with the basics. So we're starting with just our basic box step. So for this guy, what I like to do is I'll pick one spot for me to put my foot on the ground, just like that, and I'll get in my boxing stance, and then all I'm going to do is practice keeping my posture where I'm nice and bladed and stepping forward, back, left, and right. So now I'm going to be in that boxing stance, elbows are tucked in, I'm rounded, drop my back shoulder, and then my weight is in the pads of my feet. Then I'm just going to step forward, back, left, and then right, just like that. Now I want to make sure that I'm not doing a couple of things, right? I want to make sure that I'm not jumping, right? And then jumping back, but instead that I'm taking full steps. And then I also want to make sure that as I take these steps, I'm not just stepping forward and then I'm just kind of holding here, right? I want to be in a nice, sturdy, balanced position before I step again. Okay? By taking our time with this drill, this helps promote kind of some of the more complex stuff that we'll be getting into by the end of the month. So now we're going to be building on that box step. So rather than just me being stuck in one spot where I'm not throwing any punches, now we get to start incorporating some of our punches into this, right? We almost like to think about these as isolated skills. You start with how to throw punches, then it's how do I move my feet, and then it's how do I throw punches and move my feet, right? So now we're gonna be again in that regular kind of position. I'm still doing the exact same thing I was before, which is I'm stepping forward, back, left, and right. But now I'm going to try and synchronize my footwork. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up coming forward and I'm going to shoot my jab as I move my left foot when I step forward. So I'm going to step forward, one, okay? And then as I bring my back foot in, then I'm going to throw my two, boom. And then as soon as I'm planted, right? And planted just means my feet are stuck in this spot and I'm nice and secure, okay? That's when I'm going to throw my lead side hook. All right, now when I step back, we're gonna go the opposite way. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna step with my back foot, shoot my jab, and then I come back with my front foot for that two, and then I throw my three right after that. So for this guy, you're just going to go through all of these motions. So I'm gonna step forward, throwing all three of those punches, back, left, and then off toward my right, making sure that my foot lands in the same spot every time. All right, now we're gonna start incorporating our pivots, specifically our pivots in place. So a lot of the times when you're in front of a person or a heavy bag, it's more convenient to take a step with your pivot so that you're positioned where you want to be when you're throwing your punches. But there are select circumstances where pivoting in place is going to be a better and more effective tool. One example is kind of ring control, right? If I'm in the center of the ring and I want to stay there, it kind of makes sense for me to anchor that front foot and start moving off of just that foot, holding in one spot rather than taking that step. Okay, but the biggest thing that we have to remember with our pivots is it's about where I end up, right? Our pivots have to be done with a purpose, and it's not about kind of where I start. It's about where I want to finish, right? Am I trying to get around somebody's shoulder? What am I trying to do? Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to start incorporating our pivots into this. So now I'm going to step forward, 1, 2, 3, and then I can either pivot in or I can pivot out. All right, so when I pivot in, I'm going to swing my back foot around to that 45 degree, and then I can come straight back forward. All right, so as we're doing this, what I want to see you guys do is you're going to step forward, 1, 2, 3, and then you're going to step back, 1, 2, 3, and then I just want to see you pivot in and pivot out. All right, by taking our time to kind of pivot in place, one of the things that this promotes is stepping with the pad of our foot, right? So rather than me stepping and kind of walking the way you'll see people walk typically, where they kind of go from their heel to their toe, what we're doing instead is we're trying to just use the pad of our foot. So when we pivot, we're getting out of the habit of doing this and into the habit of doing this, because that's what we're looking for. All right, now we get to start moving into some of our ladder drills. The first one we're gonna be going over is our strike zone drill. Now this is kind of an old sparring drill I used to do and still do pretty frequently. And this involves range, right? So we have to remember in boxing that there are range at which we can attack. Now all of these are a part of the pocket, right? There's the inside, which is where I'm really close. This is where my straights or my ones and twos are less effective, but my inside punches are really worthwhile and placed quite well, right? I'm within range to where I can build up that power in my legs and sink into whatever I'm throwing, okay? Then we have the pocket. This is where I can actively exchange my ones and my twos and every other punch that we throw. And then we have the outside. Now we can kind of think about this like I'm trying to keep somebody as far away as possible. And this means that my ones and twos are throwing at full extension. I'm rolling that shoulder to get that extra kind of half inch. And then I'm going to try and keep people at a distance the entire time. All right, so now when we're working our strike zone drill, this is where we get to start playing with this distance, right? When I am on this side of the ladder, what we're gonna be thinking about is that I can't be hit by my opponent, okay? And then as soon as you step in with your front foot, so once my front foot is a little closer to my opponent, I'm in range, then it's my job to actively throw some ones and twos, right? So I can actively throw some ones and twos, and then if I take one more step forward, then I'm on the inside, right? And then I step back, I'm at ones and twos range, and then I'm all the way back out from here. Okay. The other thing that's going to change as we're working this ladder is going to be where I place my hands, right? What I don't want to see you guys do is keep your hands down here when you're in the pocket or when you're on the inside, right? My hands need to transition up into that tight, high guard, right? So I need to kind of see through binoculars right over my eyes with my elbows tucked in close to my body. All right, so now let's talk about this drill specifically. All I'm going to have you guys do is step forward and backward. So I'm gonna be on the outside of the ladder, okay? I'm gonna take that step in, and then all I wanna see is a 1-2-1. So I'm gonna step in, 1-2-1, and then I'm stepping right back, okay? Then we're gonna step in, and we're gonna go 1-1-4-3. So I'm gonna step 1-1, and I'm stepping again, 4-3, working my way back in, and I'm just gonna walk back out, just like that. So now we get to start playing with the ladder for its intended purpose. Now, the ladder is really, really good for helping us work on our footwork. And kind of the best reason for that is because it gives me a box. If my foot doesn't end up in the box, I've done something wrong, right? So I have this really nice feedback loop where I can kind of determine where my feet need to be when this is done correctly. So for this guy, what I'm going to do is I'm stepping in with that 1-2, and then I'm stepping back at that diagonal angle, okay? So I'm gonna step in, bop, bop, right back out. Stepping back in, right back out. Back in, right back out. Again, right back out, right? We wanna try and make sure that our feet are synchronized with these boxes every time. I'm not going to try and end up where I'm stepping on a line, right, wherever I'm at. Okay, but this starts to build on some of the drills that we've already done, right? If I end up taking that step forward and I can't quite find the placement for my jab with that front foot, then I probably need to go back to that box drill that we practiced on week 1. Now let's get into the second half of this drill. So that only takes us halfway down the ladder, and then we have to work our way back. So when we're working our way back, what I want to see you guys do is you're going to be taking that diagonal step, except now you're making an entrance, right? I'm moving toward my opponent, okay? So now I'm gonna practice moving straight in, and we're gonna stick with just that basic 1-2 on our way in, all right? So right here, if I've got this box right in front of my foot, I'm aiming to step in the box off toward my left, all right? So I'm gonna step in, I've just got that 1-2, and then I'm stepping straight back. Then I'm stepping back in, 1-2, straight back. And I'm just going to work my way all the way down the other side of that ladder. All right, now so far with this ladder, what we've been doing is we've just been working forward and backward, where I'm always facing forward. I've always got that direction behind me. Now we get to start using the ladder to kind of a more extreme kind of use case, right? What we're gonna be doing is we're going to be starting to implement some of our pivots, all right? So I'm gonna start with this ladder right here. I've got my feet in that boxing stance, which means you can almost imagine like 4 of these little squares instead of just the 2. My front foot is going to be in that top left corner, and then my right foot is going to be in that bottom right corner, okay? And then from here, what I want to see you guys do, you're going to give me a 1-2 with a step forward. So I'm going to step forward, 1-2, and then all I want to see you guys do is pivot, all right? Now again, for this pivot, we're going to be pivoting in to start. So then I'm going to pivot, and then I'm right here. okay? And then what I wanna see you guys do is you're going to work laterally down the side of this. So now I'm gonna go again, 1, 2, all right? And then we're going to pivot out, still in place. So now I'm working forward, I've got my 1, 2, pivot in, right? And I'm coming here, 1, 2, pivot out. Trying to keep that weight in the pad of my foot. One of the things that's gonna slow you down the very most when you do this drill is going to be having weight in just my heel, right? I don't wanna have a super flat foot. This doesn't mean I'm up on my tippy toes, but this does mean that I'm nice and balanced down the center. So now that I've got that solid kind of positioning set up, now I step forward, 1, 2, pivot, and then I'm here, 1, 2, pivot back, right? And then you're going to get to the other side of the ladder and continue down the opposite way. Try and make sure, be mindful of your punches, that you're still throwing at full extension as you do this, and try not to get in the habit of looking at your feet. All right, so for this drill, we're going to be getting into our snowflake set of drills. Now, when I refer to a snowflake, all I'm referring to is this kind of ratty piece of tape that we have here on the ground, or pieces of tape that we have here on the ground, and it's very, very good for kind of letting me know where my feet need to be as I'm moving. And this is a really good tool when we're working on our pivots. I find that a lot of people really struggle to either pivot too much or too little, right? We wanna make sure that we're pivoting to 90 degrees. So when we're on this star, this makes a lot of sense, right? What I'm going to do is I'm gonna line up one of my feet with one of the diagonal pieces of tape to me, okay? And then I wanna make sure that my heel is on the opposite side of that line, right? So for this line of tape right in front of me, my toes on one side, heel's on the other side. Okay, now what I'm going to do for my pivot out is I'm going to take that step and I'm going to rotate through, and I want to make sure that I'm still lined up with that tape. I want to make sure that I'm lined up with the tape down that opposite end. So now when I'm working this line, right, my toes still on one side, heels on the other, and I can practice again with that pivot, and I'm reset again in that same location. Okay, I like to see people practice this with their gloves on, and the reason for this is because I get to see where my guard is, and I get to see if I'm starting to spread my elbows too much. I want to make sure that I'm well protected, especially when I pivot. Okay, so that's how we pivot out. All right, this is going to be one part of our drill. The other part is going to be pivoting in, or a cross pivot. So when I take that pivot in, what I'm doing is I'm stepping to that same kind of square that I'm leading in with my trail side foot. Okay, then I'm just going to rotate all the way through that motion, and I want to make sure again that I'm lined up on that same position. Okay, so now I'm going to do that same thing. I'm just going to step, and I'm just turning right here so that I'm well positioned in front of that next kind of quadrant, right? So then we can do that one more time. I'll step, turn all the way through that motion. So all I'm going to have you guys do for this drill is line yourselves up for that pivot. Make sure that your feet are in the correct spot after every pivot. You're going to give me 3 pivots out in a row, and then you're going to give me 3 pivots in a row. And then you're just going to do that for our set intervals. Okay, now we get into a different piece of kind of footwork that we can practice. So this isn't our pivot out, this isn't our pivot in. This is an entirely new way that we can kind of step around our opponent. So let's talk a little bit about where this is going to be useful. This is what's called a shuffle step, right? When I'm in front of my opponent and their lead foot is kind of jammed in between my lead foot and my trail side, right? It becomes very difficult for me to pivot in around somebody's foot. Okay, so instead, what we're gonna do in kind of a defensive setting is I'm gonna practice my shuffle step. Now, what a shuffle step is, if I've got somebody's lead foot right there as I'm taking a step with my back foot off to the side, and then I'm just going to shuffle around their lead side. Okay, so you can almost imagine somebody's shoulder right here, they're jabbing past me, right? And all I'm doing is I'm just trying to use that shuffle step right around their lead side. Okay, so when we're using our little star for this drill, right? One of the things that we can do is we can measure out how far we should be stepping. So I'll get myself lined up again down one of these axes, and then all I'm going to do, instead of taking a step with my front foot right here for my pivot in, now I'm going to take a step with my back heel and try and get past this diagonal line. So now I'm going to step right past this diagonal line, and I want my front foot to end up in the same place. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shuffle over just like that. Okay, so if I'm repeating that one more time, I'm lined up again. I've got my toe on this side, and I've got my heel on the opposite side of the line. Okay, so now rather than stepping and pivoting in, now I'm going to step with my heel and rotate off toward that side. Okay, you still want this to be that nice quarter turn. The difference is that somebody's moving forward. I have a barrier around my front foot. Awesome, you guys. So we're going to be going over half steps. Now, half steps are an awesome kind of tool that we can use to learn and work on our boxing a little bit more. So when we teach somebody the fundamentals to their boxing, the first thing that we have them do is take their full step forward and full step back, right? So when I say step in, what I see people do is, and what I want to see people do on their first day, is step with their front foot and their trail side foot. Okay, now we can do that same thing, stepping back, stepping off toward our left, and stepping off toward our right, right? This is our basic box step that you guys do right at the beginning of this same patch. Now what we're going to do instead is we're going to be working on half of that motion. And this is just that first part. So this is just going to be me taking a step forward with my front foot or off toward my left with my front foot. If you're southpaw, it'll be off toward your right. Okay, and then we're doing that same thing with our trail side. So I'm going to step with my back foot, and then I'm going to step with my back foot off to the right side, making sure that I'm even every time. Okay. Now for this drill, what you guys are going to do is you're going to take half of each time interval, and you're going to have to move your feet. So you're going to be starting with your front foot right in the center of that star. Okay, and then I'm going to have you guys take a half step forward, back to center, half step off toward your left, back to center, back and forth between those two motions. Okay, we're going to take this one step further, and I want to see you shoot your jab at the same time. So you're going to shoot that one straight forward, come right back to center. You're going to shoot that jab off toward that left side, straight back to center. Okay, and then you're going to realign yourself, and you're going to put that back toe right on the center of the star. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to be practicing variations of our pull, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be pulling straight back. I end up moving just that back heel, reset, straight forward, okay? And then you do that same thing off toward your right if you're orthodox, or left if you're southpaw. And then as I do that motion, I'm also gonna shoot my jab, okay? So I'm gonna shoot my jab off my back foot, I take that step, and then I step off toward my right side. So for our next week and our last week of drills, what you guys are going to be doing, or what you're going to need, is just going to be one cone, all right? We're going to be working on our L step next. Okay, now this is a really complex piece of footwork, and if we do this incorrectly, we're kind of breaking some of the rules of basic boxing, which we don't want to do. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to have us kind of go through the motion, and then we're going to end up using this cone as a little bit of a barrier. Okay, so what it is, you're going to be working off of stepping toward your trail side. Okay, so what I mean by this is I'm not stepping back, right? But for me, I'm stepping toward my right side. If you were southpaw, you'd be stepping toward your left side. Okay. But rather than just taking that simple lateral step where I'm right here and I step laterally off toward that side, now we're going to be stepping in kind of a different fashion, all right? So we're going to break this down in a couple of different steps, and then we'll go from there. So first thing that I'm going to have you guys do is you're going to kind of simultaneously take a step back with your front foot and step off toward the side with your trail foot. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to step straight back, simultaneously kind of turning my stance this way. So I'm going to come here, and then we're going to move on to our next step. Okay, so for the next piece, you're going to reset with that front foot straight forward. All right, if you're doing this correctly, you won't be changing angles. You'll just be stepping off toward the side. So now if I do this in one motion, I'm going to come here and then reset straight forward, right? So I'm here, here, reset, straight forward, okay? This works really well when you're trying to walk people down and their front foot is in the way or their jab is in the way, right? I can start to take my head offline, I step, create a little space, and then I move right back forward, right back in, off beyond somebody's lead side shoulder. Okay, now let's get into the drill portion of this. What I wanna see you guys do is you're gonna have one cone. This is going to act as somebody's lead side foot. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna put it right inside of my toe, and then I'm just going to practice stepping around that side, okay? So now rather than taking that lateral step straight forward, where I'd end on the opposite side of the cone, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my L step. So I'm gonna step here to here, and then reset off the opposite side of that cone, okay? So now I'm coming here, bang, bang, reset, and then I'll reset again, bang, bang, reset, making sure that you're moving your feet simultaneously for the first part of that motion. Awesome, you guys. Next, we're going to be getting into our hop pivots or our Costamato shifts, right? Now this is a Mike Tyson motion. This is what we're practicing, right? And that's really where this comes from. It involves using momentum in order to create that same angle change I normally would with my pivot in or my pivot out. It requires me to be pretty explosive in my legs and take some time to really get down. So what we're going to do is we're going to practice this in front of our cone, all right? Now we're going to do the same way if I pivot in place, right? I'm going to end up just kind of off to the side wherever I pivot, right? So if I'm right here, I'm going to end up just off toward the side from where I was before. The same thing happens when we're practicing that hop pivot, okay? So if I want to get 90 degrees around that cone, what I need to do is I need to take a step and then pivot, and then I'll end up where I want to be. Same thing for my pivot in. I'm stepping and pivoting every time, all right? We'll pause there. That should be good. Okay, cool. All right, so we want to do that same thing for our hop pivot. So with that hop pivot, what I'm going to do is I'm going to step from in front of the cone off toward that side, and then all I'm going to do instead of rotating on my foot is I'm going to give it a little bit of a hop. There's more bend in my legs, and then I'm just going to turn through that motion, okay? Then we do that same thing for a cross pivot or a hop pivot in. So now I'm gonna step here, load in my legs, and then I just untwist at the end of that motion. So when you're practicing going through this motion, try and make this kind of a quick motion. Go through the steps, bending in your knees, taking that step first, right? But then try and make it into one thing. So now if I'm doing my hop pivot out, I take that step, rotate. Take that step, rotate, right? The idea behind this is it's supposed to be a quick angle change where you can drop levels, all right? So I want to get below somebody's ones and twos, and I want to quickly turn for that 90-degree angle. So practice that hop pivot in and hop pivot out. First starting by taking that step, bending in your knees and rotating, okay? And then try and make it into one motion as you kind of progress through this drill. All right, now we have our last drill. For this guy, what you're going to need is a little box of tape on the floor, okay? What I'm going to practice doing is my pendulum step. Now this is really a drill to make sure that we are light on our feet and that we're transitioning our weight from one foot to the other. Now, what I don't want to see when we do this drill is I don't want to see you put both feet in the box and hang out. My goal is going to be to stay wide the whole time, but we're practicing changing angles as we go through and do this. So I'm going to start with my lead foot in the box, and now all I'm going to do for that pendulum step is I'm just going to step and turn, okay? My feet are not both in the box at the same time. I'm still keeping a spread in between my legs, but I've got this little bit of a hop, all right? And then all I'm going to do, I'm going to continue along that same plane and rotate through that motion, still keeping the pad or the weight in the pad of my foot, okay? So now you're gonna go through that same thing off toward your opposite side, back and forth, okay? And then you can do that same thing when you're working diagonally. Some of the kind of usability for this is going to be that quick angle change around somebody's side. This also helps people develop their hop pivots as well as that L step, right? I'm trying to get used to keeping my feet spread but quickly shifting where I'm positioned, right? So rather than kind of just thinking about it as two separate steps, here to here, right? I want to start putting that together and make it one motion as I go through and turn on that foot. So for these rounds, I want to see you work from one side to the other, back and forth for our set time intervals. So that is our footwork patch. Make sure that if you have any questions, you reach out to the head coach or coaches at your gym. I'm incredibly excited to see how this helps you guys and your respective footwork. Let's get to it.